Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Fox 505 feed special previewing the GOP gubernatorial debate with Republican candidates Greg Hull, Duke Rodriguez, and Doug Turner. Now, we got a lot to get to, so let's dive in first with my conversation with News 13's political analyst and UNM professor, Gabe Sanchez. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us to preview this gubernatorial debate tonight with the GOP. First thing really is kind of the elephant in the room on this with our polling, and that is the undecided voters. The number of undecided voters, again, looking at 60% of this. What do any of our three candidates tonight have to do to kind of break away from the numbers that they're currently looking at?
You know, and that is the elephant in the room. When you have almost half of the electorate that's still trying to formulate an opinion, it sends a strong message that folks are still trying to get to know these candidates. And somewhat far into this race, right? We're not that far away from Election Day. I think for all the candidates, that's somewhat of a scary proposition. I think the main thing all the candidates have to be lazily focused on is trying to send a message to Republican voters that they stand a chance of winning in the general election. I think that's the key. And I think one of the underlying concerns that all the candidates have is the fundraising totals aren't very high, especially when you look at the Democratic side and the huge numbers that they have. So I think a lot of Republican voters are wondering, will any of these three candidates actually have a chance to win in the general? I think all three candidates, that's the message that they're trying to send is I can win, I can compete, I have a chance at beating one of the Democratic side on the ticket when we get to the general.
Gotcha. Now, of the three candidates, I think that there are pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, but do you see any particular advantages within each of the candidates that kind of sets them apart from the other two?
Well, I think they all have pros and cons, right? On one side, I think Hull, being a former mayor, can tout his recent administrative oversight. He can speak to things that went positively under his watch in the city of Rio Rancho, one of the biggest cities that we have in the state of New Mexico. So he brings that kind of executive experience, and I'd be ready on day one to step in and lead. I think that's the narrative that he has available to him. I think Doug Turner's a little bit of an interesting dynamic. He's a little bit behind in terms of the polling, but I think of any of the three candidates, he might be the person that I could see emerge tonight and have somewhat of a path. And that's somewhat because of the fundraising abilities that he has. He's run statewide before. I think his overall TV ads have been very, very clean, makes sense given what he does for a living. So I think he has somewhat of a potential maverick position. I could actually see him jump out into the lead of these three candidates. Rodriguez, on the other hand, he's got what a lot of other candidates simply don't have, which is almost infinite resources on his own to dump into the campaign and give himself a chance. Even if he doesn't generate a lot of external funding, he'll have money to get his message out down the stretch, and he's got a varied background. So he's got those dynamics. He, however, somewhat surprisingly, hasn't done so well in polling, despite being able to spend quite a bit of money. So I think that's the pros and cons of all three, if that's hopeful for the voters out there to have an opportunity to see at least one of the three candidates speak to the issues that they care about.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned something, and I kind of wanted to unpack a little bit more that Doug Turner, he's kind of been working in statewide areas. And one of the elements that we have talked about in terms of pros and cons and advantages is name recognition. And obviously, former Mayor Greg Hull has got a pretty big name recognition because of his office in Rio Rancho. But because of Doug's work, do you see that he may have an advantage over Greg Hull in other parts of the state that, Rio Rancho is pretty far from, like down in Silver City or down in Deming or up in Raton? Voters there does Turner have any kind of advantage over Hull in that regards?
I think it's always possible. I mean, you have, unfortunately, sometimes backlash to Albuquerque Metro oriented candidates, right? And obviously, Rio Rancho is in Albuquerque, but for a lot of voters in rural areas of the state, we're all the same in the Albuquerque metro area. So I think that is somewhat of a challenge, right? Because you have to win statewide, and particularly on the Republican side, you've got a lot of rural voters who might end up, swinging the ticket just because of the dynamic of the Republican Party. So Doug Turner, having that experience before, being able to think about a statewide campaign, having very strong capacities in media outreach, all of those dynamics definitely play well for Doug Turner. And I think a lot of us had wondered, would Turner be able to capitalize potentially on the quote unquote Trump vote out there? President Trump is a lightning rod in this campaign. I think all three candidates have been careful in how they approach that. we've all wondered, would Doug Turner or any of the three candidates, step into that lane and somewhat welcome, somewhat of at least being colored as potentially a Trump candidate. And that might be something that we all pay close attention to. If that question comes up tonight, will any of the three candidates actually accept that dynamic and lean in on potentially being perceived as somebody more closely attached to President Trump?
Right, and that's kind of leading into that next topic that I wanted to talk about. Now, our Emerson KRQE polling showed that President Trump has a 55% disapproval rating from the respondents. So, yeah, that question is how will, and we've talked about it previously too, how will the Trump factor play into this? As we've previously spoken as well, Trump has made the notion that when his name is not on a ballot, Republicans don't do as well. There's not as big of a Republican turnout. But just because of where Trump is polling within the state of New Mexico, do you think he's going to play a big factor in how the GOP primary rolls out?
I definitely think it could be a huge factor. And as you laid out, right, it's a very dangerous proposition for all three Republican candidates. National polling, as you know, polling here in New Mexico has the president at his lowest approval ratings at any point in his 2 terms in office. So it's not as though, he's somebody that you say, if I latch on to him, it's going to have automatic positive effects, right, for my campaign because of where his approval ratings stand. However, if I'm one of the three candidates and I see myself still below in polling, this might be, an opportunity to see a jolt to my campaign if I lean in on that and take advantage of the fact that you do have a pretty good number of Republicans across New Mexico who are supportive of President Trump. So I think that's, pros and cons. But if I'm a candidate that sees myself behind, this might be a last chance opportunity to see some movement and give myself a chance to emerge victorious. Now, the flip side of that is, right, if you go there and you win the Republican primary, that's definitely going to be a deficit for you when you move to the general election. But that's a calculus all three candidates and their brain trust behind them are going to have to evaluate closely.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I thought was also interesting in some of our polling in terms of thinking of what was most important to voters, looking back in 2024, regionally, nationally, the economy and immigration were very high on people's list of importance. The polling that we have from Emerson KRQE here, immigration actually came in as the least salient for voters at just a 5%, versus economy, which is at 23%, and healthcare at 23%. So because of that shift that has kind of happened within New Mexico voters over the last 2 years, does that potentially change the messaging? And the reason I ask is because a lot of times people will look at the economy and immigration as being a concern that Republicans do better with. So the fact that immigration has kind of fallen down in terms of importance, should they adjust their messaging or adjust how important immigration is in their messaging?
I definitely think you should. And I mean, immigration's always been an interesting policy issue for New Mexicans, primarily because despite the fact that we're a border state, we have a relatively small segment of our population who is foreign born, significantly less than you might expect, less than Arizona, less than even Colorado. So I think immigration is definitely an issue based on the polling that the candidates should not lean in as their primary conversation with voters. Clearly, right, top of the mind of voters is inflation. How can I afford gas prices? How can I afford food? And secondary to that, I see healthcare. We're coming off a legislative session where healthcare was incredibly salient. And I'll point out, when you look deep into the polling and you ask people, if you say inflation is your number one issue, what are your top concerns in terms of what's costing you more? Beyond gas, guess what it is? Healthcare costs, particularly here in New Mexico. So I think the candidates need to craft a message. Here's how I'm going to make things easier for you at the pump. Here's how I'm going to make the overall cost of goods expensive for you in New Mexico. And here's how I'm going to provide jobs that pay a higher salary so that New Mexicans have jobs that afford all the rise and everything that, is costing us more every day than it did yesterday. So I think that's what's going to be key. Obviously immigration is an important issue, but I don't think it should be the number one thing any of these candidates focus on if they're trying to use this last opportunity with the debate stage to swing things in their favor down the home stretch.
Well, Gabe, we appreciate your time and insight today, and I know you're going to be watching here in just a little bit with us as well, so thank you so much. All right, after this quick break, we take a deeper look at how the undecided vote is going to play a critical role for the candidates heading toward primaries next month. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This Republican gubernatorial primary is a wide open race. Our KRQE and Emerson polling show that 60% of voters are still undecided. Now, the KRQE Now show political power ranker weighed in on those results with the help of Dean Staley.
We got the Republicans who, I mean, at one time, Dean, in the 90s, there were Republicans everywhere. Pete Domenici, Gary Johnson, Heather Wilson, and not so much anymore. Spence, let's go to the Republican governor's race.
Yeah, we'll take a quick look here, but it'll be interesting to hear Dean's analysis of what's happened in New Mexico, particularly on the GOP side. So we can see here we've got about 436 participants in the study. We use the same data collection methods of texting primarily with some online and email components. And again, this electorate is going to be more male and slightly older. So as we take a look at those crosstabs, you get to see what the Republican voter looks like compared to the Democratic voter. And here, what we have is a very wide open race. Majority of voters, 60%, are undecided. Gregory Hull, though, has the advantage, about 2-1 over Rodriguez and Turner, but there's a long runway ahead, and we'll see if one of these candidates can really make a splash or if Hull can just kind of take this all the way to the finish line.
Dean, same drill here. Just tell us a little bit about these guys, because I have not seen these names before, but I'm sure you know them much better than I.
Absolutely, but I think the polling in this case really does show the fact that these are not high-profile people. You have Greg Hull, who is the longtime mayor of Rio Rancho, which is a suburb of Albuquerque, about 100,000, a little more than 100,000 people. That's really one of the only big industries we have here is Intel, which is based in Rio Rancho. So that's his town. That's his city. I think people mostly agree that he's done a serviceable job as mayor. You get measured as mayor whether you deliver on basic services, and I think he's done a good job of that over the years. He's also done a fair job of bringing other companies and businesses and jobs into the Rio Rancho area. So that is Greg Hull, who's at 21%. But he's not a guy, I should point out, if you live in Rio Rancho, you absolutely know him. If you live just a few miles away in Albuquerque, his name might not be familiar to you in the Albuquerque metro outside of Rio Rancho because he's just not your mayor. Duke Rodriguez, really interesting character. This is a man who worked his way up within the Loveless healthcare system, which is one of the major healthcare systems here in Albuquerque. At one point, he was the COO of Loveless Healthcare. So pretty high level executive type. He later parlayed that into ownership of Ultra Health, which was and is a medical marijuana outfit. So he made a lot of money doing that. He doesn't have a super high profile in New Mexico because he's been in the private sector all this time. He actually splits his time between here and Arizona. He has a home in the Phoenix area. And there's actually been a little bit of squabbling so far about whether he was eligible to run for governor, because he had voted in Arizona back in 2024, it looks like, and maybe a couple years before that. So that's still being worked out in the courts. But that's Duke Rodriguez. And I think the sense is that he has a fair amount of money to spend because he's been successful and he has a pretty successful marijuana business. Doug Turner is an interesting character because he is definitely a Republican insider. He's one of these guys that's worked inside the party. He was Governor Gary Johnson's campaign manager back in the day. And he's the guy that I think some Republicans will call and say, hey, can you connect me to some fundraising within the party? I want to run. And he helps organize some of the candidates and gets them set up. He also, Doug Turner ran for governor and lost in the primary some years ago when Susana Martinez won the Republican won her first term. So that's been, more than a decade ago. So he has had his hat in the ring before. Doug Turner, by profession, he owns a public affairs company. So that's his business. But none of these candidates have super high profiles across the state of New Mexico. So this undecided number of 60% seems absolutely right on target with me. I think a lot of people are going to have to learn who these people are before they figure out who they want to vote for.
Now, Dean, we're going to get in the weeds just a little bit with both know, because this person had huge name recognition. A guy by the name of Mark Ronchetti. He used to work for Nexstar. We used to work for Nexstar as a weather person. You were a coworker of his. Mm-hmm. The Republicans plucked him out of broadcasting to be a name and a face. That didn't work. He lost the Senate and a governor's race. pretty handily, and now they kind of got on a different route, and that's interesting. Is that on purpose?
Well, I'll tell you this, Chris. I know Mark pretty well. We sat on the set every night for years and years, right? I really like Mark. He's a good guy. I don't think they necessarily recruited him to that race. I think both times he ran for Senate and for governor and lost both times. Those were his own personal ambitions. He had that massive advantage of TV people who, everyone around the state knew Mark. I mean, you go anywhere and people are coming up to him. It's like being out with Elvis, the guy. I mean, he really had a lot of what I would say juice. I mean, he was it is a charismatic, funny guy. And that's why we loved him on the set as a meteorologist. So Mark ran, I think, sort of motivated by his own desires. And I think both times he was stuck in this place where New Mexico, if you look at the registration, you've got 41% Dems and 31% Republicans. And as a Republican, you've just got to thread the needle, right? You've got to run toward the Republicans during the primary. And there were a lot of Republicans during that time that didn't trust Mark. I mean, he came from the metro and they thought, oh, he's that liberal. So you had the sort of MAGA elements in the more rural parts of New Mexico who, when he would go to the county conventions as a Republican, were looking at him, sort of sideways, saying, "Well, I'm not sure. Are you a rhino? Are you one of us?" So he had a difficult time having to run during the primary toward the Republicans, and then, of course, as always happens, then you try to run back towards the middle during the general. So I think Mark did a pretty good job navigating that, but the numbers I think those were really difficult numbers to overcome. And then we can get in a whole other discussion about Trump, where he had to sort of, quietly say I support Trump, but not be too loud about it, or you lose the Democratic and the central voters, right? The middle ground.
Right. So, we're going to take a break here in a second, but I want to ask you one more question. What about Trump and these three candidates? What have they said?
You're hearing nothing about Trump right now. I think no one wants to talk about or be, you don't have except for this. I will say Sam Bregman among the Dems came out early this year with some really hardcore ads saying, as the district attorney for Bernalillo County, I will go after ICE agents if they kick in your door and they don't have a warrant. So he had some really sort of sexy ads saying, I'm going to defend all of you, which I thought was a smart move in terms of I think that resonates with the entire populace. You get the Dems and you also get some conservatives or Republicans who feel like maybe ICE has overstepped in some ways. And there's this sort of Western sensibility of, you're not going to do that in my neighborhood. So I thought Bregman was smart to run those ads. Otherwise, you're hearing nothing about Trump right now.
Now, this is a weekly show you can catch on our CTV streaming service, KRQE Now. It airs every Friday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Stay caught up on the latest in politics, political polling. Chris Berg and Spencer Kimball will break down the latest national and state polling on the hottest races across the nation as we get closer to the midterm elections in November. All right, when we come back, we are talking with the hosts of New Mexico News Insiders about their conversations with the candidates and what sets them apart from each other. We'll be right back. And welcome back to this very special Fox 505 feed preview of the GOP gubernatorial debate happening here in just a few minutes. We are joined by Chris McKee and Gabrielle Burkhart, hosts of our New Mexico News Insiders. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, you got to sit down and talk with each of the Republican candidates before going into this debate. We're going to talk name recognition. That really kind of seems to be a very salient topic when it comes to the GOP side of the primary ticket. First question, for those that may not know, who are the three candidates?
Yeah, well, I can briefly explain, it maybe in a quick one-liner. Doug Turner, he's a lifelong Republican who believes, this is from his website, believes New Mexico is being held back by big government, one-party control, and leaders who have lost sight of who government is meant to serve. He's never held office, but that's Doug Turner's platform. Greg Hull was elected as Rio Rancho's mayor in 2014. Then he was reelected twice after that, making him the longest-serving mayor in Rio Rancho. Not the current mayor, but he's held that office for a long time.
Okay.
Duke Rodriguez is the current CEO of Ultra Health, which operates more than 24 cannabis dispensaries across New Mexico, and he's had some history in government.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think you can tell when you hear the conversations, which those will publish actually after our debate here. But,
Okay.
you know, one of the things that I think was most noticeable is just how their perspective is informed by the jobs they've held, right?
Mhm.
So Greg Hull, being a former mayor, talks about wanting to work on more of a community approach with local communities. So really individualize his approach for government with the individual communities. Doug Turner, small business owner, never held elective office, as Gabby mentioned, but really I think gave the perspective of just like, I've been a business owner. I've been in the trenches. I've seen where we can support people like me. There are many of them out there. Duke Rodriguez, now a big business kind of guy, right? With Ultra Health, a large apparatus there, and also a former cabinet secretary too. He was the DHS secretary under Governor Gary Johnson, and so you kind of just get a bit more of the approach of. You know, while I think they all have similar perspectives on what to do with business and government here in New Mexico, they all bring a really different type of flavor to it based on their history. Right?
Yeah, and it really seems like it touches on a variety of different sort of perspectives with a small business, large business, someone that has worked in government for quite a while, so a variety of different things. One thing that they all seem to kind of have in common, and as we were talking about, is that they don't have the national sort of in like statewide recognition. Is that going to play a factor? Do you guys think that it's going to play a factor, or from your perspective, is it already playing a factor? You know, Greg Hull might be a great name in the metro area, but what about the folks in Silver City or up in Raton? Do they know these folks?
I think so, for sure. And that's why people should tune in to the debate tonight to really learn who these people are, because you're right, they don't have that huge name recognition. And in our KRQE early Emerson poll, it showed 60% of voters in that poll said they were still undecided for the Republican primary. Granted, that was in April, but that's some huge ground to cover for undecideds. And this year is the first year that those independent voters can vote on the June 2nd primary. So that could potentially, you know, impact a primary like this one with voter turnout, where historically in New Mexico, only registered party affiliations have been able to vote in these primaries.
Now, do you guys feel that, and you may not have an answer to this, but do you feel that in some of their campaigning that they've been trying to reach some of those independent voters and those folks that may not know who they are, that they have to win over?
I think there has been some indication of that, but I think the big issue they'll likely confront, and of course we're going to see it in the numbers once Election Day comes, but I think the big issue they're going to confront is how many people actually know about this, and even if they know, are they willing to go to the ballot box to cast the primary ballot in one of the two major primary elections? And so, yeah, I think there's this idea, this could be a difference maker, but I don't think anybody's really hanging their hat on it per se. I think they're just trying to appeal directly to who is in the party right now. And with so many undecided voters, though, in that poll, I mean, it is such a wide open race, which I think makes this really you know, an interesting dynamic here when you've got these three candidates from very different perspectives, all sort of struggling with name recognition.
Yeah. Now, one thing, and, you know, again, I haven't seen the questions for debate tonight, so I'm not sure. I imagine this is probably going to come up. Two very important topics based on our polling: healthcare and CYFD in various capacities. Did you get a sense of their plans when you spoke to them about what they plan to do should one of them be elected to the office?
For sure. I mean, and we can get into it way more than probably we have time for. So I implore everybody to listen to our episode with the candidates, because they speak at length for each of these topics. But, you know, they all have kind of different ideas. I would say Greg Hull and Doug Turner both mentioned, you know, restructuring the sort of healthcare to really invest in the rural communities where we don't have as many doctors, really incentivize those doctors. Doug Turner mentioned, you know, his brother was an ER doctor in Artesia and is now working in Arizona and able to keep more of his money. So he mentioned taxes for sure, cutting down on those personal income taxes here in New Mexico so that doctors, you know, can keep more of their money and have more of an incentive to work in New Mexico. Greg Hull mentioned mentioned structuring it kind of like the GI Bill, you know, serving rural communities where they need medical students and sort of student loan forgiveness there. And Duke Rodriguez mentioned himself, like, if you want a healthcare governor, like, I'm your guy. I've worked in healthcare before. That we really need to stabilize the healthcare system in New Mexico.
Yeah, and Duke Rodriguez's perspective also informed by Loveless Health here, where he was a CEO for some time there as well. On CYFD, I thought it was interesting. Greg Hull talked about it shouldn't be a political appointment, needs to be based on, the idea of them having a lot more experience in the role directly with children, youth, and families. Doug Turner said he doesn't think that being an independent agency changes anything. And then as well, CYFD should remain under the governor for Duke Rodriguez's perspective, just saying that it takes a governor to really stop, though, and to tell everybody, stop, the problems need to end now, and the governor needs to really just sort of take charge of the situation, but wasn't necessarily endorsing the idea of giving it to an outside agency to appoint a leader of CYFD.
Gotcha. So it seems like some different perspectives on that. Again, we'll find out a little bit in the debate, but also finding out on your podcast when we can talk to folks. To that end, after we see the debate and we want more information, where can we find these conversations? When will they be published with the GOP gubernatorial candidates?
They'll be published a week from now, I believe, and you can just search, subscribe. I would suggest to our podcast on it's New Mexico News Insiders, wherever you're listening to podcasts, KRQE YouTube page, or our website. All the platforms.
Yeah.
Okay. All the platforms.
KRQE.com/insiders is also a good place to go.
Everywhere you can find KRQE, you will find Gabby and Chris. Guys, thank you so much for your insight and analysis, and always the great work on the Mexico News Insiders. Fantastic show.
Thank you, Chad.
All right, guys, it is about time for us to wrap and get things ready for the GOP debate. Again, if you want more information, KRQE.com. Be sure that you join us on the Fox 505 feed weekday mornings from 7 to 9 on Fox 505. I'm Chad Brummett. Thank you for joining us.
It's decision time in the land of enchantment. Who will be next governor of New Mexico? 3 Republicans are on the June primary ballot. Duke Rodriguez, CEO of medical cannabis company Ultra Health. Doug Turner, founder of communications firm Agenda Global. And Greg Hull, 3-time mayor of Rio Rancho. Tonight, they square off in a live KRQE debate.
And welcome to this live KRQE debate special. Tonight, we are joined by the candidates looking to secure their spot on the GOP ticket for governor. Here are tonight's rules.
The debate is split into 3 topics. For the opening question of each topic, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond, and after that, Jess and I will facilitate the discussion without time limits, pushing for deeper answers, calling on candidates to respond to one another, and also deciding, of course, when to move on.
At the end of the debate, each candidate will get 1 minute for closing statements. The order for candidates' responses was decided by random drawing. Our first topic tonight is public safety.
And gentlemen, we thank you for being with us. The first topic, even though crime is trending down in our communities in the last 18 months or 2 years, our KRQE Emerson polling shows that New Mexicans still concerned a great deal about crime. In fact, if you look at the national numbers, New Mexicans care about this far more than their counterparts in other states. As governor, what would be the single most important thing that you would do to solve the crime problem? And we start with you, Mr. Hull.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for having us here this evening. It's great to be here. And crime is an issue that we hear about every day. When we're moving around the state and talking to individuals, it is top of mind. And so the polling is correct when that is the top concern. What I will do as the next governor is I will take my experience as being the mayor of Rio Rancho for the last 12 years and work with these communities to solve crime where it's happening the most, in the communities, and making sure that our communities are equipped to deal with crime and that they have the resources, including the personnel, to deal with that crime. That's going to take additional funding. That's going to take strategic planning. That's going to take organizing around the issues that we're finding inside our communities, because not every community is exactly the same in some of the issues that they're dealing with. When you think about the difference between Albuquerque and some of the problems you might have in Espanola. So we want to get in, work with these community leaders, work with the mayors, work with the councils, and make sure that we're solving those issues on the ground level.
All right, Mr. Hull, we thank you. Turning now to Mr. Turner, you have 1 minute. What is the single most important thing you would do to solve crime in our state?
So I've traveled everywhere in the state, and I've talked to law enforcement probably everywhere in the state as well. And there is one issue that they always bring up, and that is we have a revolving door when it comes to crime. And we see it here in Albuquerque, and you see it across the state. And this is a result of a 2016 Bail Reform Act that took place here in New Mexico. It's a constitutional amendment, which provides for cashless bail and allows judges and DAs to let criminals out prior to trial. So what you see is law enforcement arresting the same people over and over and over again. A couple months ago, a block from this station, I was walking my dogs, and a guy was shot maybe 20 feet from me. I spoke to the detective several times as they were looking for him, and they said, this is probably a case of a guy who's done this before. He put his gun out the window and shot, not someone who just did it for the first time. So this is what we need to focus on, and it's not going to be easy.
All right, Mr. Turner, we thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, your response to what many consider a crime epidemic in our state.
I'm going to go a little deeper. You've heard about the issue with resources. You've heard about the issues of revolving door. Both of those are true. But we also need to get to the core of why we have crime in New Mexico. Particularly, think about this, poverty. Until we deal with the issue of poverty in this state, we will have more crime. Poverty means we need more jobs, more opportunities, more hope. People need to know that they can end up somewhere positive. Besides poverty, we have the issue of a failing education system. It ties into crime. Recently, you heard a report that we had 32,000 kids who are neither in school or not working. If we don't deal with poverty, if we don't deal with education, crime will continue. But there's two other pillars of pain that I like to talk about. There's the issue about mental health. Unless you deal with mental health in New Mexico, you see it up and down our streets. If you don't have crisis intervention, you will have crime. And the last thing is addiction. We have to realize we have an addiction problem, and we must deal with it, and we must have resources to deal with it. Poverty, education, mental health, and addiction.
Mr. Rodriguez, thank you.
On to the next question. We'll start with Mr. Turner. What in your background makes you the best candidate to lower crime in our communities?
Wow. Aside from having been a victim of crime on many occasions, and I chased down a guy who broke into my car at one point. My background has focused on public policy issues across the state for 25 years. I've focused on crime, I've focused on drug addiction, mental health, as Duke talks about. We've worked on issues that come before people, that come before voters, they end up in the legislature, and we have managed these issues at a state level. So starting off as governor, I would have a zero learning curve. I mean, I understand not just crime, but all the issues that we're going to be talking about here tonight. I have been on the front line in terms of fighting them and debating and in making the case that we need substantive change in our legislature. And quite frankly, you know, we have a legislature that's going to need both parties to come together to solve problems. If I'm talking about a change in a constitutional amendment, you're going to need both parties to come together to make that happen.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I am absolutely the best candidate to deal with it from life experiences. Everywhere I go, I talk about living the true New Mexico experience. I'm a child of poverty. I know what it's like not to have. I lived in the projects in Alamogordo. I know what food stamps are like. I know what Medicaid is like. I know what are diseases of despair. And that includes suicide, depression, PTSD, living without hope and understanding what tomorrow might be is just as risky. When it comes to the issue of poverty, I'm familiar, and I know that we will never resolve crime in New Mexico till we lift our people up. When it comes with dealing services, I was a provider through Loveless. I ran the largest healthcare company in New Mexico. I provided mental health services. I provided addiction services. I understand what it is to have access. We can talk about crime, but unless you have actual solutions and then have access and pathways to get care, it's not going to get better. And the final thing has to do with education. I am a product of public education, as is my son, as are my children, my grandchildren. The thing about it is, education is a part of our system. Our teachers need to know that we address the needs of all young people, and there's a pathway and a better life. And I've experienced that, and I think I can share that kind of leadership.
Mr. Hull.
My experience is on boots on the ground experience, running the second, third largest city in the state of New Mexico, and keeping and attaining the recognition of being the safest large city in the state of New Mexico. Equipping our law enforcement officers, making sure that we have the staffing, making sure that we're competitive with pay, and making sure that we are enforcing the laws. That's a big one, because when criminals feel like they can just walk through your city streets and get away with anything they want to with no accountability, that becomes a problem. It really becomes the broken window syndrome. And we combated that head on in Rio Rancho, and I'll combat it head on in New Mexico as New Mexico's next governor. We have proven leadership plans that we can put to use, once again, right in our communities.
And Mr. Hull, I do want to push back a little bit
sure.
on that. Just because, I mean, we can all agree that Rio Rancho has different demographics.
Yes.
It's more affluent. How much of a role does that play in having lower crime in Rio Rancho?
Well, it plays some bit of a role, but it doesn't eliminate crime. Crime is dynamic. You have to look at it where it is, and you have to assess it where it is. Once again, every community in the state is going to be a little bit different. And so we have to assess that on an individual level and make sure that we're resourcing our communities to actually combat it. I've built a police department in Rio Rancho, and we have expanded it and grown it to make sure that we're meeting the needs of a growing community. We need to do the same things, but other smaller communities that don't have the resources that Rio Rancho has need help from the state level. They need a partnership with the Roundhouse. They need a governor that's going to step in and actually be a partner in solving these problems. And with somebody with my experience in solving these problems, we'll take that format to each community. We'll develop strategic plans around their specific issues, and we will help them achieve the goal of bringing down their crime issues.
Gentlemen, thank you. Our next question is about guns in our communities. It is widely accepted, I think, among law enforcement that anyone who wants a gun, a juvenile delinquent, a felon, can get a gun easily in our community. And we here at News 13 report on gun crimes, it seems like every single day. What would you do as governor to stem the flow of guns to people in our community? And this time we'll start with you, Mr. Rodriguez.
You know, I used to serve on the juvenile parole board. And to deal with guns, you have to understand, we give an environment where we actually tell kids, young people, that they're not held accountable. And when that comes to possession of weapons, acquiring of weapons, there have to be penalties. And if you do the crime, I've often said you have to do the time. When it comes to guns, but we have to balance that with the truth about Second Amendment rights. I am absolutely a supporter of Second Amendment rights. The fact is, we have the right to bear arms. But at the same time, we also have to realize we have a duty to make sure it's not in the hands of criminals. Keep in mind, it's really important to understand, it's easier to be a criminal today than it is to be a cop. And so if we don't support our law enforcement If we don't enforce the laws we have on the books, and that's the key, I keep bringing over and over, we've got enough laws. Quit talking about promoting more requirements, more restrictions on gun sales, and just enforce the laws we have now. If you have illegal possession of it, you're held accountable, you're not going through that revolving door, and you will pay the time.
All right, Mr. Rodriguez, thank you. Mr. Hull, what would you do as governor to keep guns out of the hands of bad guys?
This goes back to equipping our police officers and empowering them to enforce the law, making sure that when they find somebody that's in possession of a firearm that they should not have, we remove those firearms from those individuals. If they've broken the law or they've used that weapon to commit violence, those guns need to be removed. But I've said this before and I'll say it again, you don't solve crime through the rights of innocent law-abiding citizens. So we need to make sure that we balance the rights of law-abiding gun owners, protecting their Second Amendment rights, but at the same point in time, really holding criminals accountable. That is going to be key going forward. You get the guns away from the traffickers, you get the guns away from the gang members, you get the guns away from the criminals that are doing all the harm, and then you hold those criminals accountable. You get them into court, and once again, you have to stop that revolving door system that'll, you get them, you arrest them, you take the guns away, they're back out on the street, and they have the guns, a new gun in just a matter of hours. That revolving door system on the justice system has to come to a stop. We have to hold criminals accountable and make sure that they don't get guns going into the future.
All right, Mr. Hull, thank you. Mr. Turner, we turn to you. How do you get guns off the streets?
It's a tough question. I mean, I agree with both of my opponents up here. You know, there's a law enforcement function. You know, there is an education function. I mean, young kids getting guns. We had a kid shot here at Washington Middle School, I think a year ago. It is an epidemic, but you know, that genie's not getting put back in the bottle in this country. I mean, guns are out there, and you know, I am a strong supporter of Second Amendment rights. I think people have and must have the right to defend themselves. At the same time, you know, as we've all said, you have to look at the systemic causes of crime, and you know, lift our economy. And you know, kids aren't born as criminals, right? I mean, you want to make sure they live in good households, they have, you know, good values, and they have good education. That doesn't fully answer your question, but this is a tough issue.
All right, Mr. Turner, thank you. And I want to be more specific and be very clear here. I know you're Republicans here. You have concerns about Second Amendment rights. That's clear. But will you hear and just briefly state, do you think we need more gun laws? Do you think we need more enforcement of the laws we have? Or do you think we need fewer? And this time we'll start with you, Mr. Hull.
I don't think we need more gun laws, quite frankly, and we do need to enforce the laws that we have. When you think about the laws that are on the books right now, it's against the law to kill somebody. That's a law. We need to enforce that law. When somebody goes out and commits a heinous crime, they need to be held accountable, and there needs to be zero tolerance for that. When you're involved in a crime where you have used a gun to inflict harm or murder someone, accountability is the key in this situation. Okay. So I'm going to say, no, we don't need more laws. Yes, we need to hold people accountable.
Mr. Turner, your thoughts?
I completely agree. I don't think we need more laws. You know, I can tell you for sure that a criminal is not thinking about what kind of sentence they're going to get when they go commit a crime. I mean, they're pretty sure they're not going to get caught. So, you know, more laws is not going to, you know, change whether they get a gun or not.
But isn't this more reason, if I may, Mr. Turner, isn't this more reason when you have teenagers who aren't especially rational? They're probably the least rational part of their lives. Sure. Isn't it more important than ever to try to keep guns and the supply of guns off the streets from these people? You seem fatalistic about this.
Well, I'm not fatalistic, but you know, I'm honest about it. I mean, absolutely, we should be working to get guns off the street and get guns out of the hands of teenagers. But you started the question. You talking to law enforcement that anybody who wants to get a gun can get a gun, and it's true. Right. So, you know, where does that start? Does that start, you know, with education and making sure that kids have good options and don't drop out of school and don't end up at a skateboard park shooting somebody? Or does it start somewhere else? And I am a firm believer that it starts early. You know, you can't just snap your fingers and suddenly keep guns out of kids' hands. It's a systemic problem that we have to address.
Okay, Mr. Turner, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, your thoughts on gun control?
You know, I think you've heard the same comments from my two colleagues here. Keep in mind, I don't mean to just keep emphasizing this, but when you grow up in the projects, when you live in a lower social economic class, you see guns. Kids can, as you absolutely said, can you get your hands on guns? The absolute truth is you can. But young people don't desire to grow up to get a gun. If you don't recognize that we don't give them the alternatives. If you don't deal with their physical well-being, if you don't deal with their mental well-being, if you don't deal with even their social well-being, I promise you, they're going to find that trajectory that's not good. So it's not enough to say pass more laws. If you don't deal with the core of the problems they face, they're not going to get better.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Now we'll start with Mr. Turner. Do you think we need to shift the burden for involuntary commitment for the mentally ill?
Shift the burden?
Yes.
To?
Just making it easier to commit people if they're mentally ill.
Perhaps. You know, we have a homeless problem which is out of control. You see it everywhere in the state. You know, I've talked to people at the city, you talk to law enforcement. You know, we have facilities where they can go to, but a lot of them don't want to go there. I mean, we saw this with, you know, clearing out of Coronado Park here in Albuquerque. All those people have now just moved over to First Street, you know, the underpass there. People don't go to the Gateway Center as we'd like them to go to. And quite frankly, a lot of them do have serious mental problems, and there has to be, you know, a compassionate way to intervene. And if that means, you know, doing what you're suggesting, perhaps we have to do that.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I have built mental health hospitals. I built the last public hospital in this state over on Gibson. If you remember the old Loveless Hospital, it was the last built hospital in the city of Albuquerque. And today, what is it? It's a shelter for homeless. I've learned by building psych facilities, inpatient facilities, you can talk about all these things, but in the end, you have to realize what we've changed in this spectrum of caring for mental health. We used to institutionalize people. We used to have more psychiatric beds. But then we took on this new attitude of saying everybody can survive out there in an outpatient treatment center. We have to be realistic. Provide the service opportunities for addiction. Provide the services for mental health. But after a while, when you've offered all this diversion and they still don't accept it, you have to commit to having facilities where we can direct and institutionalize certain patients. That's not a bad thing. It's actually more compassionate than leaving them openly out on the street to die. So homeless on homeless crime is a crime. The fact is, if you want to deal with mental health, we have to look beyond this continued liberal belief that all we have to do is leave them out there and everyone will get better. No. Some patients deserve group, congregate, aggregate care, and institutionalized care, and we need to have those services built back into our society.
Mr. Hull.
A compassionate approach is always the right approach, but you have to get to a place where you have to recognize, especially when you have homeless individuals that are living on the street, it is unsanitary, it is dangerous, there's open air drug use, there's people using the restroom on the streets, they're starting bonfires on the streets. All of these things are happening right out in the open in front of everybody. At some point in time, after you've offered everything you can offer, you said, we've got a place for you to go over here. Let's get you over to the Gateway Center. We've got some resources over here. Let's get you over here to these nonprofits that can help you. Let's get you over here to these faith-based ministries that have a lot of resources. And at the end of the day, when they reject it, and you have somebody that is just really, really struggling with behavioral or mental health issues, I think it's in their best interest that you do direct them mandatorily toward treatment facilities that would allow them to stabilize and get better, because otherwise, if they're making their decisions that are out on the street there and they're not getting the medication or the treatment that they're needing, this is going to be an ongoing problem and they're not going to get better. So if they won't help themselves, I do believe we need to step in and intervene and help them help themselves even more by pushing that in a more of a mandatory way.
Moving on to the next question, we'll start with Mr. Rodriguez. The state's Children, Youth, and Families Department is in crisis. Do you believe it's time to remove the power from the governor to select a secretary?
I think in the hands of the right governor, we can actually deal with CYFD. Imagine this. The fact is, we've had too many deaths. We have these bizarre policies about letting children sleep in CYFD offices. We've sent signals to our entire CYFD staff that children do not matter. And you may say, why? When you prioritize things, and this is controversial, but it's true, when you prioritize things such as abortion clinics and say that's a priority to our population, that's not prioritizing families. I believe in the hands of the right governor who understands that we value families, we value the importance of supporting those families, that we tell the CYFD things have to change. And for example, if everybody understands what's called the Kevin S. settlement, Right now, most of our CYFDs are controlled. Their hands are tied behind the back because of a court order. And it hasn't been really taken back to court and adjudicated to say, you know what, let us prove that we can lead this department effectively and untie the hands of CYFD to do the right thing.
Could you give us an example when you say that their hands are tied? What do you mean by that? Like, what are some examples?
The CYFD the Kevin S. settlement, basically what it does is it turns over the control of a lot of our issues to an independent, no specific metrics for performance. It's open-ended. Basically, you continue to go back and have this three-party panel make decisions, and most of the parties don't even reside in New Mexico. They're actually outside in Los Angeles and back east. When I'm saying very specifically, you've got to set very specific targets. And we had this with, if you remember, in the prison system with the old Duran Consent Agreement. The same thing applied here. Until we lifted the Duran Consent Agreement, we didn't have control of our CYFD. Most viewers need to understand, we do not have control of CYFD. This administration in 2020 and for the last 6 years has been under this agreement. I want that settlement to go away, and we put the control back into the governor and back into leadership of CYFD without the revolving door in the secretary's position, and we appoint a secretary who knows and understands child welfare, not somebody who came over from the tourism department.
Mr. Hull.
Yeah, is that I would be open to any suggestion that would keep our kids safe. If it means removing it from the governor's office, then so be that. But at the same point in time, we need to make sure that whoever is vetting this director or the secretary of this department, whether that's a committee or individuals, that they are looking for the most qualified individual to run that department. This is critical, making sure that they have the credentials necessary to take care of the children that are in their care, custody, and control. Making sure that they are working closely with foster families to create a strong pipeline so that when kids do come into their custody, they have a place to go and not stay in those offices. I would be an advocate for fully funding the Office of Child Advocacy in the Attorney General's office to have that particular office oversight CYFD as an independent agency to make sure that they are complying with the Kevin S. settlement provisions, to make sure that our children are safe, and to make sure that there's open and transparent communication between caseworkers and foster families, and there's open and transparent communication between caseworkers and families that they're trying to really get to reunification. And reunification, that's a wonderful thing if you get there and you don't compromise safety and you don't compromise the health of the child. So I would be open to any suggestion that drives improvement in that particular department. But I think we're going to need to hit the ground running and make sure that we have somebody qualified at the leadership level immediately.
Mr. Turner.
So I think the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think it needs to stop at the governor's office. I don't support, an independent entity determining how the agency is run. But what I do, want to point out is that this is an agency that's been broken for 30 years. We have had, maybe 16 kids killed under the custody of this agency. I mean, that it took, our Attorney General, as long as it took for a report to come out to say that, our management of CYFD is a moral failure is itself a moral failure. I mean, this has been going on for decades. What we need to do is get rid of this policy of mandatory reunification. I mean, why should the state be extending its efforts to rehabilitate a parent that's already failed with a child, and meanwhile we're moving children from one foster parent to another, which is damaging to that child? I mean, we can turn that back to your question on guns or mental health. We need to do everything we can to get those kids into safe and loving homes immediately. We need to change the culture of secrecy there, and we need to have somebody who is responsible, and that needs to be the governor.
All right, Mr. Turner, thank you. We're turning now to our next topic, and that is the economy. There is probably no more important policy issue for a governor than taxes. So we would like, in 1 minute each, your tax plan as governor and what that would mean for New Mexico taxpayers. And Mr. Turner, we start with you.
So we have, I think, the 8th highest tax burden in the nation. We are the highest personal income tax state in the region. Colorado is at 3%, Texas at 0%, Arizona is at 2.5%. We have a high gross receipts tax, which is regressive. I mean, it hurts the people who can least afford it the most. So, I have been talking since day one about reducing our personal income tax to 3%, which is reasonable and doable. And I've talked about slowly decreasing our gross receipts tax in the state. There are things that we have to consider when we cut these taxes because our municipalities depend on them for first responders, law enforcement, et cetera. So we need to have, hold harmless clauses at the legislative level that fund those deficiencies that come when our taxes are eliminated. We've got a $72 billion personal fund, permanent fund at the state level, so we have the funds to do it. But we have to do it over time because otherwise we will wreck local economies.
All right, Mr. Turner, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, your tax plan and what it means for New Mexico taxpayers.
From the very beginning, I've been very specific. Everywhere I've gone, people have heard me say probably 1,000,000 times, New Mexico is not a poor state. We are absolutely a poorly run state. And when it comes to that reality, I've been very specific about taxes from day one. Number one, not reduce, not talk about it, not phase it in. Eliminate state personal income tax, just like Nevada, just like Texas. We are a wealthy state. We can afford it today. Number two, eliminate New Mexico gross receipts tax on all retail sales. That's very specific. That's talking about when mothers and fathers go to Walmart or Target, when they pick up books or dresses or diapers. Immediately, you see that savings. No further conversation. We can afford it. We had the courage on groceries. We can do it on all retail sales. And number three, eliminate the state's portion of state property income, property tax. We keep talking about it, and it's amazing how important that is to our fixed income individuals like retirees. I have heard over and over, it's my home, it's my land, I paid for it, no more taxes.
Mr. Rodriguez, I just want to be a little more specific. You're talking about eliminating gross receipts taxes on all consumer purchases. Does that mean the state's portion or all of the portions? And if it's all of the portions, how do you fund municipalities and counties?
I've been very specific because I want to clarify. Eliminate the state's portion on New Mexico gross receipts tax, because you're going to hear from cities and counties, oh my God, the sky is going to fall. In fact, it's not going to fall, but I think it's a more responsible thing to give local control back to the cities and counties for their portion. Let them be fully accountable to their voters. I'm talking about the majority of the gross receipts tax is about 4.75. That relates wholly to the state portion. Eliminate that on day one.
Okay, understood. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you. Mr. Hull?
Well, I think a practical approach, making sure that we protect services and making sure that we don't compromise quality. I would love to look at how we're going to eliminate personal income tax. I think that's low-hanging fruit, and that's going to make us a lot more competitive when it comes to attracting people into the state, whether that's retirees that are coming in with their Social Security incomes or people that are moving their jobs here, people that are coming to get employment here. That's going to be attractive. That's going to put keep more money in the pockets of the individuals that have it. And I believe that out of all of the three, when you look at the three main sources of revenue from the taxation side of New Mexico taxes, that personal income tax, eliminating that, and doing it responsibly so that we don't damage services, that we don't compromise health care, we don't compromise public safety, we don't compromise infrastructure improvements, but we actually focus on how we can eliminate that to attract more people into the state.
All right, Mr. Hull, thank you.
This next question will go to Mr. Rodriguez. Congress eliminated tax credits on health care premiums and slashed Medicaid. The state passed nearly $300 million to make up those losses. Is backfilling of federal spending with state money something you would support?
First of all, we are the #1 state when it comes to Medicaid. Last 10 years ago, we had 836,000 Medicaid subscribers. 10 years later, we actually have 35,000 less. But our investment, our spending actually on Medicaid has doubled. We've gone from spending $5 billion to about $11.2 billion. I absolutely believe we have enough resources. We don't have a resource problem. We have a results problem. There's enough spending. I used to run the Medicaid program and reformed it. For the last 25 years, nothing has been done to it other than grow the number of enrollees and approve greater and greater spending, but with no accountability. So when you say, do we have to backfill it? I don't think we have to reach into the Treasury anymore. Make the most of the dollars we have now. Eliminate waste, abuse, fraud, and I promise you, there's enough money to meet the needs of even all the New Mexico with greater access.
Mr. Hull.
I'd be in support of backfilling it to the extent of we need to make sure that we protect rural health care, because they're the ones that really depend the most on these Medicaid distributions. And so when you look at the federal government cutting that back, and you look at the impact that that has on rural communities, and you look at the fact that they're already dealing with provider shortages in our rural communities. They can't get certain services, and they can't get appointments for months, and they have to travel hundreds of miles to get simple services. And then you think about some of the major treatments that people need, like cancer treatments and so on and so forth, where they have to leave the state. So we want to make sure that we protect those that are most needy in this particular case, and make sure that those benefits are protected, and that we're not closing down hospitals, because you start closing down hospitals and clinics in rural communities, you start affecting local economies in a very negative way.
Do you think it's fair to ask New Mexicans, though, to pay for those subsidies the federal government won't?
I think it's fair that we make sure that we take care of the most vulnerable of our population, but we also have to make sure that people that should not be receiving these services aren't receiving these services. Make sure that we're going in and following the guidelines when it comes to eligibility, and making sure that the individuals receiving the benefits are eligible, and follow the 6-month the requirements of recertifying the eligibility. That way we know that the people who need the services are getting them, and the people that shouldn't be getting them aren't getting them. Because once again, a lot of these programs that you've seen put in place, they were meant to be a helping hand, not a lifestyle.
Mr. Turner.
I don't agree that we should necessarily come in and backfill this where the federal government is not. The federal government's doing it for a reason. You know, they're looking to find efficiencies. They're looking to cut fraud, waste, and abuse in the system. That said, you know, we do have a state with a lot of people who do have needs. And so to that extent, you know, when we talk about things like free child care for all or other programs that the state provides, we do have to make sure that we are providing those services to those people. But I do think, as Duke has, you know, wisely, you know, suggested, we need to be very careful on how we do it, and we need to make sure there is no fraud, waste, or abuse, and that the money that the state is spending is actually getting to those people.
Mr. Rodriguez, you wanted to interject?
You know, I get very concerned when I hear this. We have to be spending here, we have to spend there. We are exceptional at spending. But when the studies have been done, we pay up to 325% more for the same activity in other states. Picture that. We pay more for behavioral health. We pay more for primary care. We pay more for hospital care. We pay more. And you have to wonder why. We have this very perverse system, think about it, that capitates all these MCOs and actually rewards them for not providing services. Do you realize if doctors leave, if people don't get visits, if hospitals don't get inpatient admissions, they still get paid? We've created on our own, because we have not been good stewards of our money. We've encouraged a system that it discourages access. I've said stop, stop, stop. Stop raising the reimbursement. Stop coming up with the excuses. The White House is right. We need to be held accountable. Spending is not the answer. Even this last year, we had 27% growth in Medicaid expenditures in a decline in enrollment. It's because we've simply accepted the premise that sending out more checks must mean good. It does not. Access, proven by the LFC, has shown access has declined and they've gotten paid more. That has to stop.
All right, Mr. Rodriguez, thank you. The next question has to do with New Mexico ranking among the worst in the country for access to doctors. Mr. Hull, as you talked about, that's especially true in rural areas. As governor, what would you do to recruit and retain doctors in New Mexico? And Mr. Hull, we start with you.
Absolutely. I think we now, after the passage of HB 99, medical malpractice reform, I think that's a first step. But I think there's a long way to go to rebuild the trust with the doctors that have left the state to get them to come back. So we're going to have to look at creative incentive programs that would allow them to come in. We might look at for student loan paybacks for them if they're carrying currently student debt. So we might look at that, bring them in, incentivize them to go into the rural community so that we have them there. But I think a really great plan is to create that pipeline also. When you talk about recruitment and retention, we need to create a pipeline. Go into the local communities, go into the high schools, and start working with the high schools and the kids that are looking to get into the medical profession. Get them into college and expand our current college education program to cover the student costs to go to medical school, so long as that student will go back into that community and serve in that community for 4 to 6 years.
All right.
So it's pay it forward type of situation where we work on recruitment and retention. At the same time, we're building a pipeline, and that way we're building kind of a legacy supply, if you will.
All right, Mr. Hull, thank you. Mr. Turner, your thoughts on growing the number of doctors in our state?
So I don't think the doctors who have left are coming back. So my brother is a doctor, born and raised here in New Mexico. He worked, in the southern part of the state, and he moved to Phoenix for 2 main reasons. One, our med mal rates are too high, so we desperately need tort reform in this state. We haven't had a serious tort reform conversation in decades in New Mexico. And you want to know, why the billboards, the lead buyer of billboards in New Mexico are trial lawyers from out of state, is because this is a great place to come and sue people. So we need a cap on legal fees. We need to deal with our medical malpractice costs. And quite frankly, we don't pay them enough. My brother makes more in Phoenix than he does here, and he pays half the taxes. I've met with dozens and dozens of doctors, including a round table last week with about 20 of them, and that is a key point. The other thing is that for an independent doctor, they are a small business. We look at all these incentives that small businesses ask for. We ought to be incentivizing small business doctors to open up their clinics in rural New Mexico. And that might require funding from the state, whether it's loans, cheap loans. It costs maybe $1 million for a doctor to open up an office. And we need to be looking at that as an economic development tool, not only for the doctor, but support for the community.
All right, Mr. Turner, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, you've worked in healthcare much of your career. Your thoughts?
I am the only person up here who's actually recruited doctors, hired doctors, know what it takes to keep them, and what kind of compensation levels they accept. This malpractice reform that was recently passed is not going to do much of anything for at least 36 months. It's not going to get us new docs. We need to be more aggressive and more realistic about the solutions. For example, I've asked a lawyer who actually represents people who sue for malpractice. And if you ask them, how many lawsuits are filed at UNMH and how many are filed at Presbyterian? There's a reason why. UNMH is subject to what's called the Tort Claims Act. Presbyterian is not. Even with the reform, there may be very slight rate reductions, but you're not going to see that for 24 to 36 months. I want to be more aggressive. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If we got all our physicians in an association lawfully that allowed them to be subject to the same Tort Claims Act, you would see an immediate drop. If you want physicians to stay here, they have to thrive here, more than just survive. Eliminate state personal income tax, talk about the gross receipts tax, improve their education. It is more than just saying it's premiums. I think that's a great diversion to get the public to say we did something. Be honest, we haven't done enough. You want docs to stay here? Give them the reason to stay here and thrive.
We'll start with Mr. Hull. Do you support universal child care?
In short answer, no. We need to have evaluated that program completely. Is that I support helping people in the lower echelon of income earners that need help while they're going to school or maybe have a lower paying job, single moms, single dads, those individuals that really need the help. But when you talk about universal, you're talking about giving free child care to people of any income level, people of any at any space in the income spectrum. And what we have to look at is, should we be subsidizing daycare for individuals that are making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year? So when we say the word universal, what I think we need to do is we need to look at the program, evaluate it closely, make sure we're serving the people that need to be served, but at the same point in time, in this particular program, we did not have the infrastructure to really kick this program off. The infrastructure was not there. We don't have the daycares. We don't have the workers. We don't have a lot of the certifications across the state that need to be in place to make sure that kids are being safe. And this is ripe for fraud when you don't have the state inspectors, that when the state license is being issued from a state agency, the state doesn't have the inspectors to go out statewide and look at all these daycares. So I want to make sure that if we're going to structure a program like this, that it is well constructed and it protects the taxpayers from this type of fraud.
Mr. Hall, I'm going to stop you just
Okay,
so that we
thank
can.
you.
Sorry,
sorry,
we're
thank
trying
you.
to get many questions as we can in. Mr. Turner, do you
Sure.
support universal child
So,
care?
I support the intent of the legislature. I think there are a lot of people in New Mexico who really need child care to get back to work. The execution of how this was put together, I have problems with. And as Greg said, we don't have any means testing in this legislation. We don't have any sort of work requirement or even, effort that proof that you're actually trying to get work. We have licensure problems. We have crazy things like no taxes on your house if that's what you're using, property taxes on your house if that's what you're using for, to care for children. Those things need to be fixed. But do I believe that people should get child care if they need it and they can't afford it? Absolutely.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I'm going to try to make this quick. There's no secret that myself, Senator Steve Lanier, House candidate Zach Anaya, we sued the state. We sued the governor. And the reason why is the program that was introduced in October. And by the way, tomorrow is May 20th. I want you to remember that because Senate Bill 241 related to child care expansion program takes effect tomorrow. So every viewer should ask the question, if it takes effect tomorrow, how did we introduce it last October, November? Because it was unlawful, illegal, and unenforceable. That reality exists. It is not universal child care, and you're correct, Greg. It is a state-supported, totally state-funded, taxpayer-funded, expanded, unlimited daycare. Now, when it comes to child care, I believe in child care assistance, period. But it has to be done lawfully. It has to engage all the stakeholders. Is it a program to encourage work? That has to be discussed and decided. Maybe sometimes we want moms to stay home, believe it or not, moms to stay home with their children. Is it an affordability issue? Are you trying to make it more affordable? The program she's promulgated is going to drive up the cost of child care throughout the entire state and proven in other states. And number three, is it a child development program? Are you trying to get better outcomes? Think about this. None of those conversations were had. Instead, we had a governor who wanted to hold up the Stanley Cup of success and say, look at me, I'm the only person that has done this. And the reason why? Because others have taken a methodical, responsible approach. The approach we have today is unenforceable, illegal, and will not survive.
All right, Mr. Rodriguez, we appreciate your thoughts. We're moving on to our next topic, and that is called Make Your Case. Our KRQE Emerson polling shows that there is a whopping 60% of likely Republican voters who are undecided in this race. So you each have a minute now, especially given the new primary that we have, where we have independents and declined to state people eligible to vote in the primary. Make your case for why these people should be voting for you, Mr. Rodriguez. You're first.
Well, let's look at the mix of voters today. The good news is that Republicans have grown slightly, but they're about 31%. Republicans cannot elect the next governor on their own. The better news from my standpoint, nor can the Democrats. They're approximately 40% of the state's registered voters today. But here's the big newbie. 29% of our registered voters are undecided or declined to state. And by November, by this Thanksgiving, they will be larger than Republicans. So my point is, we need to have a governor that doesn't go to the extreme left or the extreme right. Someone that recognizes that you have to have a bigger tent. I am that candidate. If these individuals want to be involved, I am strongly encouraging it. Vote in the June primary. I represent New Mexicans first, and that's my goal, is to make sure the needs of New Mexican goes be above anything, above party, but the needs of New Mexican first. I'm a proud Republican, and I'm proud to represent a larger audience.
All right, Mr. Hull, your pitch to independent voters.
Absolutely. Experience matters, and I've said that time and time again. When you take the experience that I've had in a local municipality in New Mexico, the work that I've had to do with the legislature, the work that I've had to do with mayors across the state as the former chairman of the New Mexico Mayor's Caucus, as the former president of the New Mexico Municipal League, working on legislation, working with local authorities such as mayors, city councilors, county commissioners, judges, and even Pueblo leaders. I've had that interface with each of those. Worked in the roundhouse to support bills, worked in the roundhouse to fight bills. I've got the on-the-ground experience when it comes to infrastructure, public safety, working with our local education system to make sure that we achieve top results. And if there's one thing, as a matter of fact, we just saw another news article that came out today that Rio Rancho is ranked as a best place to retire in the United States once again. That's because experience matters.
All right, Mr. Hull, thank you. Mr. Turner, your pitch to independent voters.
So first off, I think 95% of all early voting thus far from independents have gone to the Democrats. So I think we should keep that in mind. Number two, Republicans have consistently won in this state, not because of the Republican Party, but because of Democrats and independents have always voted for Republicans. Number three, I've traveled around this state now for 4.5 months, and what I have found and where I've connected with people is that we really are all the same. We care about the same things. We care about our kids getting a good education. We care about, crime and not allowing our kids to play in the streets without worrying about them getting shot. We want a good job. We care about our Second Amendment rights. I mean, we are the same people. There is more that unites us as New Mexicans than divides us. And I have made that case to independents throughout the state, and I sincerely believe that resonates now, and it will resonate in the general election.
All right, Mr. Turner, thank you.
Mr. Hull, you are running for the Republican nomination for governor. President Trump is the head of your party. Have you sought or would you welcome Mr. Trump's endorsement, and why?
I haven't sought it, and quite frankly, my focus has been on serving New Mexicans and getting my message out and talking to New Mexicans about the things that are happening. Because at the end of the day, once one of us is elected governor, and within 2 years there will be a new administration. And I'm committed to working with every administration to make sure that we bring in every resource that we can for the state of New Mexico. Now, if I was to be offered a national endorsement, that would be a great honor. So it would be something that I would absolutely consider. But that being said, I'm going to put New Mexico first in all of my decisions and the campaigning that we're running right now.
Mr. Turner.
Yes. I haven't asked for it, but if it was offered, I would accept it. I would also accept the endorsement of my colleagues here after the primary, and quite frankly, Sam Bregman. But the reality is that the job of the governor of this state is to work with whoever's in office, and Deb Haaland has been running this race, talking about how she's going to fight the president on everything. And quite frankly, I think that's irresponsible from a leader and irresponsible for the state of New Mexico.
Mr. Rodriguez.
When you work in a hospital environment every day with doctors, with nurses, with professionals from all levels, you learn a phrase and you learn to accept it. That's called creative tension. And that's realizing we can't always agree on everything. I respect the White House in many of its decisions, but I'm also not afraid to say there's a certain level of creative tension between the needs of New Mexico and the needs of the White House. I respect the White House, I respect the president, but I also know my first duty is to New Mexicans. One thing that makes me different than my colleagues up here is, you notice I haven't asked anyone for money. I said I would put up my money before I reached out and took your money. And the difference I've said here, I'm not going to be bought by any other special interest or any individual. So when it comes to whether political ideology, affiliation, my goal has been always to put the needs of New Mexicans first.
Would you accept his endorsement if he endorsed you?
I would be honored if he offered it.
All right, we have a question now, and if you could give us the answer, we're running tight on time, in 30 seconds or less. You're all running for the Republican nomination for governor. There are substantive differences between your party and the Democrats. What is your warning to the people of New Mexico should a Democrat prevail in the general election? Mr. Turner?
If you are a believer that the future of our state is our children, my warning to the people of New Mexico electing a Democrat for governor is that our education system will not change. It has been failing for 30 years. We are 50th in the nation, and I have not seen one proposal from any Democrat running on how to fix it. I have clear plans on how to fix it. I've voiced those every single time I've given a speech, and I've got nearly 20 years of advocacy experience in school choice and in charter schools. Beware. If you want your kids to learn, vote for a Republican.
Mr. Rodriguez, your thoughts about a Democratic governor?
There's no question that Deb Haaland is likely to be the nominee. And we have already run for the last 8 years the MLG experiment. If you want to complete that experiment, stay with Deb Haaland. But I'm going to tell you straight up, there's only one Republican that can beat Deb Haaland. It has to be a candidate that can reach across the aisle. It's a candidate that can reach across the state. It's a candidate who has the experience to have lived the New Mexico experience and can deal with the major issues we just talked about: crime, healthcare, the economy. There is no question that I am the only candidate who can challenge Deb Haaland.
All right, Mr. Hull, your thoughts should a Democrat prevail?
I
Your
think
fear?
that this election is critical for the future of New Mexico. And if we continue to go down the same path, down the same policies, we're going to end up just, it is the definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. We have severe issues in our education system. I have not seen a plan that really changes that. We have severe problems in crime. I have not seen a plan that changes that. What we need somebody in that office that is experienced in actually dealing with these issues on the ground in our communities. That's me. And I have proven over the years, 12 years experience of working with people across the aisle. I've worked with every mayor in this state, regardless of their party affiliation. I've worked with legislators across the state, regardless of their party affiliation. Something has to give, something has to change. We all admit there's a problem, but we just are having a very difficult time saying we need to change course. It is time to change course.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more question before we go to closing. Mr. Turner, can you say something you admire about each of your opponents?
Boy, I'm going to give them both tenacity. This is a brutal process. You know, we are running around the state. We just saw each other yesterday in Tier C. You know, this is grueling, and I think anybody who jumps in this race needs to have tenacity, and they certainly both do.
Mr. Rodriguez.
I would say commitment. I think everyone who stands up here is committed for the betterment of New Mexico, and that should reflect very strongly for the future of New Mexico.
Mr. Hull.
Yeah, I got to say that amongst all of us, I have to say they have a commitment and a love for New Mexico. There's no doubt about that. When I hear these men speak, they care about their community, they care about their state, they want to see success and progress in our communities. They want to see the same things, and all three of us have talked about the same things. And so I do respect the fact that you can really tell their passion and their care for the state.
All right, Mr. Hull, we thank you. We move now to the portion of the debate where we have closing statements. You each have a minute, and by virtue of random draw, we start with you, Mr. Hull. You have 1 minute to make your case.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody, experience does matter. We've seen the problems that we're having in New Mexico. They're not unique to any one community, but every community is unique in its own way. So I know my platform is my experience as being the mayor of Rio Rancho, but that experience gives me solutions that I can work with other community leaders to really solve some of the problems that we're having in education, the problems we're having in crime, the problems we're having in addiction. All of these issues that we're seeing around the state can be solved. But New Mexico is not a one-size-fits-all state. When you think about the uniqueness of each of our communities, each community is different in character and culture. We need solutions that recognize those differences and actually develop plans around those solutions to make sure that we are achieving the goals that we all want to see. We want to see a safer New Mexico, better education for our kids, a more prosperous New Mexico with economic opportunity for our children going forward. My name is Greg Hull. I am running for governor, and I would appreciate your support.
All right, Mr. Hull, thank you. Mr. Turner, your closing statement.
You know, I lost my wife to breast cancer in January of last year, and I was not planning to run for governor. But I looked at the state, and you know, I felt we desperately needed someone who had a broad view of things, who could reach across party lines, and who was really passionate about issues. One of the things that my wife was passionate about, and we even met in middle school at Jefferson, so we've known each other for a long time, was our children. And you know, I look at my children, and I have 3, and I desperately want them to come home. I want them to be here. I want them to raise their children here. I want to get up to Taos and ski with them. I want to take walks in the bosque with them. But if we don't fix what's wrong with this state, if we don't fix our economy, if we don't fix our education system, if we don't deal with crime and mental health, we will fail and we will lose all of our children. They will leave the state. They will end up doing something else great somewhere else. And that's not something I want to see. I'm committed to this state. I'm committed to my kids. I'm committed to your kids, your grandkids, because this state is what matters, and it's what matters to them.
All right, Mr. Turner, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, your closing statement.
I've been very clear from the very beginning. New Mexico is not a poor state. We are a poorly run state. And I'll take that one step further. I think we are the worst run state in the country. And what I'm committed to is something beyond just experience. It's leadership. It's time we finally change the trajectory of this state. We are the second largest producer of oil and gas in the country. If we were a country, we'd have the 29th largest sovereign fund. We already have the state's second largest in the country. It's time that we realize the difference between always complaining, always wondering why and where the money went, and finally investing in our future. I am so committed to finally have something different. I would be the first healthcare governor we've ever had in the state, and I will deal with crime. I know what it's like to have the New Mexico experience. I will deal with poverty. I will deal with all the issues that we know that hurts New Mexico. And my only regret would be, I guarantee I will work the hardest any human has ever worked for the New Mexicans in this state.
All right, we know it's a grueling process. It's been a long process. We genuinely want you to know how much we appreciate your time, gentlemen.
Yes, candidates, thank you so much for participating tonight. Thank you to our viewers who are watching. Of course, our coverage still continues right now with an analysis of tonight's debate from the host of New Mexico Insiders.
That's right, and if you're watching our TV broadcast right now, you can switch over to YouTube or the KRQE Now streaming app to continue watching. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.
Gentlemen.
Hello and welcome to this special election episode. We are your host of New Mexico News Insiders, Chris McKee, and I'm Gabrielle Burkhart. We are joined by Dean Staley, and shortly our other anchor, KRQE's Jessica Garate, will join us here in this room. We're doing some post-game analysis of the live Republican gubernatorial debate that just wrapped up on set.
Yeah.
Hi, guys.
And we're going to take this as a free-flowing conversation.
Yeah.
We encourage you guys to send your questions if you want. Got the YouTube feed open, so we'll be able to see those comments as they come in and see if we can address any of them. But an hour-long debate, all three Republican candidates joining us. One of the things that I know you mentioned to me right off the top was felt like a pretty friendly debate.
Yeah, I just looked at the YouTube live comments as you guys were rapping, because there are some people engaging there live, and one of the last comments was, "Seems like good men, hope one of them wins." Like, it was just very friendly. It seemed like none of them were really taking shots at each other.
Yes,
right?
Jessica, thanks for joining us.
Hello. Hi. Welcome. Thank you for having us. I felt the same. I was a little shocked that there wasn't more fireworks, that they didn't go after each other, especially right now where, for the most part, there's so much undecided and so much can change in the next 2-3 weeks before this election. And so I just really thought that there would be a little bit more hits on each other, but I felt like they kept it pretty cordial and had nice things to say about each other, I thought it would be a little different. And you, Dean?
I was going to say, I don't think there was a single real, like, even I strongly disagree kind of moment. There was a little bit of differences in obviously their opinions, but
I think their main, kind of message at the end was like a warning for those who are going to vote for a Democrat, right? That's where they kind of unified around of like, our state needs some changes and you got to vote for a Republican. I think maybe a lot of that goes to what you were saying in the pre-show, Dean, of like, not a lot of name recognition widespread for these guys out of the gate, right?
Yeah, I would agree, first of all, that there weren't any fireworks. And that's always, I have to confess, disappointing. I mean, Jess and I really
that's
want...
what we're all here for in the debate.
Yeah, we do. We want people to be animated and to be passionate about what they're talking about. I'm going to take a guess at that. Part of, our polling early on showed that Greg Hull had 20%, and then Duke and Doug Turner each had 9% and 10%, right? Mm-hmm. But there's 60% undecided. So there's this wide open sort of thing. We have no idea how those numbers have changed. So there wasn't some 20-point lead. It all felt like, well, and Duke has been on television a great deal, spending a lot of money. So I think part of it is you have three people, so you don't have two people going head-to-head. Mm-hmm. And also when you have three people and there's no sense of someone's running away with it, you oftentimes don't get that. For example, if you've got three candidates and one of them is running away with it, you'll see the other two beat up on that person because they know their only chance is to say, this isn't your guy, or this isn't your woman, right? So I think that's part of the dynamic there, that it was a little more collegial because none of them felt like, oh, I've got to take this guy down, he's beating me. That's an opinion.
Yeah. I also want to throw out there, listening to them, their plans aren't very different. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's they didn't disagree on things. I felt like they had very similar tax plans. They had very, looking at CYFD, I felt like that was kind of, some of these issues, which, we can talk later, but I don't think that there was a lot of attacks because they were saying, often you would hear them say, yeah, I agree with him and I agree, so I think that was part of it as well.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting, again, you bringing this up in the pre-show of like, how much has Trump been mentioned ahead of this primary in New Mexico by these three candidates? The answer is not much, right? But you guys were able to ask them, would you endorse or would you welcome an endorsement from the president, from this White House? And they all three kind of said, I haven't asked, but I'd welcome it. And they're all agreed that their focus is on New Mexico and local issues here. I thought it was interesting that Doug Turner said he'd also happily accept endorsements from his colleagues there. And frankly, he said Sam Bregman, he said they specifically kind of took the shot at Deb Haaland, it seems like, because they all agree she will be the likely Democrat on the primary, on the ballot for November. And they all kind of said, I think it's irresponsible from leaders to say you're just going to fight the president on everything. That seemed like kind of a unified message of the three of them.
Yeah, and you've got to tiptoe through this because you got to get out of a primary, and to do that, you need to get your base. But then you're going to face a Democrat in November, and then you get attacked nonstop if you're, in this state, that if you follow anything by Trump. And so I think that they've had to really kind of figure out how do you get out of this primary, and then moving on to November, how to work this out. So you could see them really tiptoeing around if they would accept an endorsement from the president.
I thought those questions were very predictable for those exact reasons, Jess. I think you don't want to embrace Trump right now, except you don't want to reject him either. You reject him, you can't win the primary at all, right? But if you embrace him, you know that you can't win the general. I mean, you just can't. And you know that whoever wins on the Republican side and becomes the nominee, the Dems, given President Trump's approval ratings, which were in the tank right now, you know the Dems are going to try to hang Trump on him no matter what, right? So I felt like that was pretty predictable. There were no big surprises there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so this debate consisted of really three main tent poles here. We had crime, the economy, and then as the category was make your case, which kind of turned into a grab bag of a bunch of really dynamic questions about the race. But let's start with crime. We talked about right at the beginning of this how it all felt like their plans were similar, but I'm just curious from you guys, was there any takeaway moment where you felt there was a divergence in their plans with crime?
I'll let you start.
Well, I think it did surprise me a little bit that Doug Turner, and I said this to him, it seems to me he's sort of fatalistic about guns.
Right.
Anyone who deals with crime in our community knows that guns are so readily available. I don't know how you even consider bringing crime down without taking guns off the streets and getting serious about. And I'm not talking about, no one can have a gun. I'm not some, anti-gun, I own guns. But the fact that he said, oh, yeah, well, they're going to get guns no matter what. I really felt like he'd sort of conceded that that's just the environment that we live in and you have to get used to it. And we've got to work on other things. That surprised me a little bit. And I pushed back. And sure enough, he kind of doubled down on that. It's worth noting he is endorsed by the NRA, right?
Yes.
So,
well, when you did push back, I wrote this down because he said, well, I'm not fatalistic about this, Dean, but he says, where does it start? Education or somewhere else? He's a firm believer, he says, in early intervention and figuring out. But he admitted, he said, I realize at the beginning when you guys asked him about the guns, he said, I realize this doesn't fully answer your question, but it's a really tough issue, right?
Yeah. And I just think if you can educate your way, if you can educate kids not to use guns, then that's fine. You can have as many guns as you want, and the kids will be smart enough to. That's not that seems like a really hopeful, 1,000-year project, right? I think I just feel some real urgency about the fact that teenagers anywhere in our city can go pick up a gun anytime they want.
Yeah, and just to comment on what Rodriguez and Hull had to say, I think both of them aligned with this idea of we've got enough laws on the books, we just really need to hold criminals accountable and solve the revolving door system. I think there's probably a lot more nuance you can get into about how easy it is to get guns, but I think, they sort of just left us with that idea that it's about enforcement, which I don't know if the police would and prosecutors would necessarily agree. I think they'd say we're doing a lot, but we keep seeing guns coming out there.
Yeah.
So.
I thought what stood out, and I did push back a lot, was with Mr. Hull. He's been the longtime mayor of Rio Rancho. He has used this where, it's one of the third largest city in our state. And at the same time, I've got crime under control. And we wanted to point out, it's a very different demographic in Rio Rancho. It's more affluent. And so, how much is that your leadership and how much is that playing a role? And how do you make that? And I thought he made his case saying, hey, I'll work with mayors across every part of the state is different, and I'll be willing to work with them and try to get them to where Rio Rancho is.
Yeah, Greg Hull has really leaned into, and we did interviews with all three candidates. I'll be publishing an Insiders episode next week. Quick plug.
Look forward to that.
But yeah, I remember that being one of the things Hull really leaned into was this idea of I'm a mayor. I think it's best to work with communities on their individual levels, understand their problems, and craft individual solutions from the state level to tackle their issues, which sounds like a lot of work for sure.
And if we try to differentiate the three candidates, one thing that did stick out to me is that I think Hull and Rodriguez both kind of kept coming back to similar themes. Hull's was my experience as a mayor matters, and Rodriguez's was kind of tying back to healthcare constantly, even when you asked about crime and guns, saying, people, we need to address mental and physical well-being. Granted, that was a kind of broad statement, not necessarily precise on what that means, but he did try to tie the topics back to healthcare pretty consistently, it seemed like.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, and that was his last word. I'd be the first healthcare governor and really touted that.
Yeah, and just to go back over and recap Duke Rodriguez's work in healthcare, he's obviously the CEO of Ultra Health, which started obviously as a medical marijuana company, now a large cannabis firm. He worked as the DHS secretary under Governor Gary Johnson. That was in the 90s to early 2000s, and then as well was as executive for Loveless Health Systems for a number of years. We can turn certainly to our next.
Gears to the next topic. You guys asked about involuntarily commitment. Like, should it be easier to involuntarily commit somebody with mental health issues? And I think this speaks to a real broad issue we have in New Mexico, right? Where it's like you offer services over and over, but we all know, a lot of people don't accept the services. Did anything stick out to you in their answers there, Dean?
Well, I would like to point out something, and this is a confession on my part. I think as reporters, all four of us here live and breathe local news every single day. And one of the stories that we continue to cover is nuisance crime. Sometimes it goes beyond nuisance crime into dangerous crime. So you either have mentally ill people on the streets who are unhoused, and it's just nuisance crime. There's they're homeless or they're doing whatever. Sometimes they start stabbing people. I mean, we've had that on Central Avenue in front of the Frontier restaurant where someone is running around stabbing people in the neck. So I think all of us here have done those kinds of stories and done profiles about these specific, like, let's look at this one person. And I think, Gabby, we've had great reporters in our shop do great work showing our viewers that problem and just pointing out, look, this person can get arrested 1,000,000 times, but until they kill somebody or really, really harm someone, they're not going to prison. They'll go to jail. They'll get a hearing that has to do with whether they're competent to stand trial. And then the hearing will say, yeah, they're really not. And then they'll be released. So I think all of us in this room have, I certainly, let me speak for myself, I think I have a bias that is a problem that absolutely needs to be solved, and that you have a very small part of our population that creates an enormous amount of nuisance and crime. Some of it dangerous, some of it's just nuisance crime, that we really need to think about, commitment, civil commitment, and making it much easier to do that. So I just want to confess, when we come into that, I think I come into that question with these candidates with a far more serious sort of like, this problem needs to be solved. And I'm not sure these people live in places where they deal with that every day. I'm not sure they're watching every single story. So I think we live it a little differently. And I was a little surprised that people weren't more energetic about, we need to solve that.
I agree. And they all said that they were for it. We're seeing some states shifting towards that, even New York, where they're leaving it up to police. Hey, if this guy a danger to himself, or and they brought up a lot of those issues of, like, it's more inhumane to leave them, out sleeping on a sidewalk in the sun with no water and food, and so I thought it was interesting. All three were in agreement on that one, and I wanted to get that one in because I was curious. We had a lot of different questions about crime, and that was one that I also wanted to get in because we have seen it and we report on it so much. And as Dean mentioned, like the people that don't want to get help, I mean, where they, we've seen, the city has even told us, ACS has told us 80% of the time they don't want to get help. And how do we have these beds now, we have the Gateway Center, how do we get them there?
Yeah. And this is one, again, all three Republican candidates pretty much agreed that it's not humane to just continue to leave somebody on the street like that.
Yeah, right. Let's shift to the economy section here. We had about 15 more minutes here in our post-game show. And again, encourage folks, if they have any ideas on questions you want to share with our anchors, let us know. Got the comment section open. The economy, this is where I think you can really see the differences as well in the candidates at large, Democrats versus Republicans. The specific tax plans came to light. There was a lot mentioning of tax cuts here. I think that is one thing they all agree on, but how to address those cuts are differently, are certainly different in their view. And I guess just to ask you guys, any surprises that you felt came out of these tax plans? Again, Turner reminding us that New Mexico's personal income tax rate, he wants to reduce this. Duke Rodriguez talking about this idea of eliminating the state's portion of all gross receipts tax, eliminating property and income tax, or personal income tax rather, and then Greg Hull talking about personal income tax as well. did you feel you found any surprises here?
No, and I mean, that's kind of been the Republican agenda, and even at the legislature, they've looked at this. Republicans have tried to push this, and the case is that we have a ton of extra money, and we want to compete with other states, and we're losing. You can go to Texas, you can go to Arizona, where they don't have the personal income tax, and so they're really there has been a push in that it would create more people coming here. One thing we didn't get to is looking at the numbers. I mean, doing away with that is up to $2 billion. And we know how volatile oil and gas is. And when that goes away, like, how do we make up this? Or what programs do you start cutting? Because we can't be always operating at this level.
I always wonder with this, because the wealth funds comes back up. New Mexico has a very significant wealth funds that they permanent fund, right? $72 billion was mentioned as the number from Doug Turner as in the permanent fund. What is the idea? Is it to slowly leach from that permanent fund, or is it to find new sources of revenue? I don't know. I mean, that's one thing I often wonder, because I think there's many people who have a problem with the idea of rating these funds, as they say, because New Mexico's bond ratings and being able to bond against those funds is really what has the state in a strong economical position, I think.
While I think they all agree on lowering the personal income tax, I do think they kind of took a different approach in answering it. I would say Rodriguez kind of came out as a little more aggressive. Like, day one, we're getting rid of the state's portion of the New Mexico gross receipts tax on all retail sales. That was Duke Rodriguez saying that. That's, clothes, dresses, diapers, he mentioned, things like that. And Hull, I would think, took a different approach, saying, we still need to protect these services and this infrastructure. We need to do it in a way that's responsible so as not to damage services like healthcare, like public safety. And then I think Turner said, yes, obviously we need to reduce our personal income tax, but we need to do it over a period of time. Again, I think taking into consideration, we can't just break things immediately, but I think they did have different kind of approaches. I think Rodriguez was kind of trying to come out a little stronger in his messaging. Did you guys get that?
I did. The other question I had was, they have these in-depth plans and doing it, but you still got to get through a Democratic legislature. Yeah. And that's going to be an uphill battle for them. Like even when the Republicans now in state office have proposed this stuff, it's not gone over well with Democratic leadership.
Susana Martinez would probably have something to say about that, right? She had 2 years where the House was in Republican control, just barely. I think it was almost a tie, actually. But, I mean, every other session of New Mexico's roundhouse, as always, Democrats have led the Senate and the House over the last 16 years, but for 2 of them. So, yeah, I thought one of the interesting conversations, though, was about the medical situation here in New Mexico, right? This idea of, I think all of them endorsed the idea of medical malpractice laws being reformed, but I think reminded folks doesn't necessarily mean doctors are immediately coming back. And so, wanting to push further with reforms in that area. That was certainly, I think, it's going to be an interesting topic here to come for sure as well.
Did anything stick out to you in that conversation, Dean, about the economy? Because I think that's a big issue for people.
Yeah. First of all, let me make it clear. Jess and I were incredibly well studied about the tax plans of all of these people. So there are huge shockers. We've done a lot of homework for a lot of weeks and watched all of the forums they've been involved in and every profile that's been written. So there weren't surprises during this tax thing, but it's always difficult to get further down the line in a discussion like this and find out, okay, you want to cut income tax, that's $2 billion. You want to cut GRT from the state level, that's another $1.5 or $2 billion. So you're talking about $4 billion. Now you're really starting to talk about a number where you have to say, what are we not going to spend on? Like what program? And I don't feel like it's tough. It's tough in this format to get all the way down to those details. And also without putting people to sleep. I mean, you have to sort of start from the outside and work toward this. So I feel like maybe there's a weakness where we didn't get all the way down that line. I was very impressed with Doug Turner talking about his brother as a doctor, saying, hey, he left the state and he's not coming back, and you know why. And really, when he puts it in those terms, it makes you think, wow, we have so much wealth. Can you not just set up practices for every single doctor? I mean, you're spending so much money in this state on other things, and if that is such a high priority, I don't know. It sounds like it may be an insane idea, but it seems to me like maybe there is enough wealth where you say every single doctor will set your practice up and will insure you. I don't know. That's
Doug Turner he brought that story up on our show as well and expanded a little more on it. He said his doctor or his brother was an ER doctor in Artesia, moved to Phoenix in Arizona, and gets to keep more of his money basically, and doesn't have to worry about getting sued as much as he would here in New Mexico, which I think they all three brought up that's an issue in keeping doctors.
Duke Rodriguez made an interesting point too, where he talks about, because everyone thinks we've had malpractice reform at the ledge, and he's talking about the fact that you're talking about a very incremental change, not UNMH, which has its own cap, but we're talking about private institutions like Press, that they have a very different effect on that institution, and it's not broad, was his point.
I also, Doug Turner brought up, just drive down the street. You see all these billboards of every defense attorney you could possibly from out of state. I mean, we've just become this litigious state because of having that. And
how easy it is to
how
sue
easy
here.
It is to sue our doctors, and what a bind this has put us in. And how do we fix it? And then I do think the legislature did make a small move. But those doctors are gone, and I don't know how many of you guys have tried to get doctor's appointments.
It's
really hard. I don't have a primary anymore. I don't have a pediatrician anymore. I've been looking.
Sam Bregman said he couldn't get his 88-year-old mother a doctor's appointment. It was 4 months. She needed to see a doctor, and it was 4 months out before.
Not to mention a specialist. If you try to get, even a dermatologist, I think it was like 9 months for my husband. But I want to shift real quick. We have about 9 minutes, and one thing that I think is important to address with the Republican ticket is universal child care, which I'm glad you guys were able to get to that in your debate tonight, because I think, a lot of headlines have been made of Duke Rodriguez, suing the governor over the legality of her implementing this universal child care program. And I think all three candidates agreed to an extent that, child care assistance is important, but we need to relook at this legislation because they don't think it's sustainable in the long term, was kind of the messages I was hearing from them as far as like who should be getting this assistance, right? Should it be people who make $300,000, $4,000 a year? But I didn't really hear any of them say like, no, we need to do away with child care assistance. Hull did say, short answer, I don't support it, but he kind of honed in on the word universal and said he needs to, we need to relook at this program.
This one, we were really close on time, and I really wanted to push back. I've done a ton of just background on this. For Duke, who's suing, it did go to the legislature. They did end up passing it. And now you've got families that are accustomed. This is, all of us have kids. Like you're saving, if you're using their child care, $12,000. We know how much it costs. It's insane.
It's a game changer. Yeah,
it's a game changer for families. I think that I did want to push back because even if you didn't like how it was done, it's done. And what do you tell? Right now we're at like 30-something thousand families taking part in this. So what do you tell those families who have planned around this? What do you tell those families? And what does that look like? Like what happens when you do take it away, but then you got to take it back? Because he said he's for childcare and free childcare, giving it to those that need it the most. But I just don't know how that looks, and that is something. I mean, we're seeing through the courts, and that it's going to put such a weird shift in what families are doing now. And our legislature knew that we were going to be getting a new governor, so they set aside enough money for the next 5 years to cover this program. And so they are planning for this and trying to keep it intact. And so that was kind of interesting to me. As far as Mr. Turner, I had questions for him about this. One of the biggest reasons the governor wants to keep universal health, because when you have everybody involved and there's no politics involved, it's more sustainable and more people are on board for it. And so that's been their whole argument. Like, don't leave anybody out. We don't need stigma. If we've got the money, let's put it all in. And
Duke Rodriguez does not need me speaking for him, but let me offer this thought about why, given that it's popular, given that everyone officially, openly supports it, why he's suing. I think one is that he has the luxury of suing. He's a wealthy guy, and he's pushing back. But what I think he's pushing back against is this sort of what the Republicans see with Michelle Lujan Grisham as sort of this.
The unilateral creation of this.
Yes, that she just sits
Right.
down one day and says, "This is what we're doing. I grant it," as though it's almost like from on high. And I do think there's a sensibility among the Republicans
On her way out, yeah.
on her way out, and also even Democrats who were saying, "Well, we haven't talked about this." And I think the candidates today made a very good points about the fact that there's way more detail that we need to talk about. Should it be available to everyone? Should it be childcare or should it be something else? In terms of what it actually is. Should there be? Doug Turner brought up taxes and whether if you have a daycare, should you not have to pay tax? I mean, there's all sorts of detail. And remember, we had a state senator who said, well, we need to put in some sort of provision so that if the money goes away, that this thing gets rolled back. Because I think a lot of fiscally conservative Democrats looked at this and said, okay, but we need a fail-safe in case oil and gas goes to the bottom tomorrow, that we have some built-in trigger. So that tells you something about the fact that I don't think there was a massive amount of debate about that when this thing was created. And so I think that Mr. Rodriguez was pushing back against, and this is just my take on it, against that sort of the way it was created.
Yeah, I think just a reminder for how it was created, right? The governor did it through essentially the change of administrative code, the rules that surround programs. She did that in November. There was a public hearing about it, but that's far different than going to the legislature and saying, we need this money for this program, let's outline it in statute. That was done in January once the session started. And as Duke mentioned, that bill creating it in law, in statute, actually takes effect tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
And both parties do that, by the way. They try to take shortcuts and say, well, once I create this, no one's going to take it away.
And
Right?
this is
That's part of it. That's actually a strategy.
Yeah, you don't want to be the lawmaker that's going out against this program.
Yeah.
Like you have a ton of families that love it.
I have one question I want to get to
is
from
the
our
answer.
viewers. There was some pushback from one of our viewers online talking about how Greg Hull was asked about crime in Rio Rancho, and essentially arguing that the question to Greg Hull was undermining him because believing that affluent cities don't deal with or don't understand crime or deal with it in a different kind of way. And I guess that, this is just sort of the comment from the viewer, I guess, in defense of Greg Hull, saying that, Rio Rancho deals with crime because it's right next to Albuquerque, and there's a lot of run through in the metro. So there's this allegation that is undermining his work, but I guess, what would you say to that? Yeah.
I wanted him to explain that. I mean, there's very different demographics in Rio Rancho than Albuquerque.
Certainly.
You don't see the same kind of homeless. You don't see, and that's what I wanted him to get to. Like, is it, you don't have, your crime level is not at what it is in Albuquerque. Your homeless level is not at what it is. And of course, we're bigger.
Different dynamics
It's
there.
just different dynamics and different. And so is that a lot of your leadership or is that a lot of your population? So I did want him to answer.
I totally take the criticism. I get it. But I think it is, and I'm not saying that Rio Rancho is sort of like, it's not Tanawan. I mean, there's some communities in the metro that are gated communities, and everyone inside is fairly wealthy, and there shouldn't be any crime, right? So you shouldn't take credit for like, oh, I got rid of crime, right? But I do think it's a fair question because you aren't coming as a mayor, and that's his calling card. That's his experience. That's what I did. Let me show you. He's not coming from a place where he went to the roughest town in New Mexico, the poorest town in New Mexico with the worst problems and fixed it. That's So the question is just, and I think it's a fair question. How heavy was a lift is that in Rio Rancho? And again, I don't want to pretend that Rio Rancho is the most affluent place and it's so different than Albuquerque because it's not. I think it's a pretty pretty working class,
but even
upper
just
middle class.
Look at the way it's built. You're talking about communities that are vast areas of homes, and that's pretty different from the urban environment that is Albuquerque. I mean, like it or not, there's just some very different.
In terms of policing, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
different ways.
we are getting close to the end of our show, but I wanted to ask you guys briefly. We know it's the first primary on June 2nd where independents and declined to state voters can vote. Doug Turner, I said, early numbers show that those independents are still voting on the Democrat ticket. So do we think that this, will have an impact in the Republican primary?
I think very little, and only because on both. There hasn't been enough education when I talk to voters that they know that you could even do this election cycle, maybe the next election cycle. And And even then, states that do have semi-open, you don't have a high participation in these primaries. So we'll see.
I'd like to make a prediction that this will be much ado about nothing. We talk a lot about it because it's so special and different. But, you know, if we look back on this, you'll find that those people either didn't turn out, all of these undecided voters, or they turned out in the same ratios that you saw people voting anyway, Republican and Democrat in the state. So there's not some hidden pool of people who jump on the Republican ticket or the Democratic ticket here. And I think it's going to track the sort of normal number. So that's just my thought.
Yeah. Well, I think we're still live for YouTube, but we may have been cut off on our KRQE Now streaming app. But we appreciate folks
Unacceptable.
joining us here today.
Do we
That's
have
okay.
more time?
Yeah.
I would like to protest.
No, we don't have more time. He's
Okay.
YouTube does not have a time limit,
Okay.
so we're off
Okay.
whenever
Okay.
we say we're off. But yeah, our streaming app's a little different in how it's
Okay.
built. But anyway, thank you guys for joining
Absolutely.
us for this conversation. We'll have a whole replay of the debate online as well on KRQE.com.
Such a pleasure.
Thanks for the
And,
invite.
Yeah, we
Thanks,
appreciate
Dean
it.
and Jess,
thanks
for
to
all
our
your hard work.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to
Likewise.
put these together. My
Likewise.
goodness. So we appreciate all y'all watching, and tune in to New Mexico News Insiders as well. We release every Tuesday, and you can hear from all three of the Republican candidates on Tuesday. Dean, thank you for your left hand little wave there.
Yeah.
And we already as well have an episode published, we should say, with the Democrats as well. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.